On a dusty road to Prospect's End, Lillian Ashcroft is rescued by a notorious outlaw. Months later, fate places her in the courtroom where his life hangs in the balance. Will love defy the law? Before we get into the story, comment below where, in the world you are watching from today, the stagecoach rocked violently as it sped along the dusty road to Prospect's End. Inside, Lillian Ashcroft gripped the leather seat with white knuckles. Her blue traveling dress was covered in a fine layer of dust, and wisps of her auburn hair had escaped from beneath her hat. "How much longer until we reach town?" she asked the elderly woman sitting across from her. "Not long now, dear, Mrs. Peterson replied. "Another hour at most." Lillian nodded and tried to calm her nerves. She'd been away at her aunt's home in Silverdale for 3 months, and she was eager to see her father again. Judge Harold Ashcroft was the most respected man in 3 counties. Stern but fair, people said. His silver hair and piercing blue eyes, the same color as Lillian's, gave him an appearance of authority that matched his position. A sudden jolt threw Lillian forward. She heard the driver shouting, followed by the crack of a gunshot. "What's happening?" Mrs. Peterson cried. The stagecoach lurched to a stop. More gunshots rang out. "Everybody out!" a rough voice called from outside. "Now!" Lillian's heart pounded in her chest as the door was yanked open. A man with a bandana covering his face pointed a gun at them. "Jewelry and money, hand it over." Mrs. Peterson whimpered as she removed her gold wedding band. Lillian reached for the pearl necklace her father had given her on her 25th birthday. "Just 3 months ago." "Hurry up," the masked man shouted. "The driver's dead, Jeb," another voice called out. "Let's just take everything and go." Lillian's blood ran cold. The driver was dead? What would happen to them now? The man called Jeb grabbed Lillian's arm and yanked her from the coach. "This one looks fancy. Bet someone would pay good money to get her back." "No." Lillian struggled against his grip. "Let me go." "Shut up." Jeb slapped her hard across the face, sending her sprawling in the dirt. Then came the sound of another horse approaching fast. Jeb turned, his gun raised. A single shot echoed through the air. Jeb clutched his shoulder and fell to his knees, cursing. "Let them go," a deep voice commanded. Lillian looked up to see a man on horseback, his face partially hidden by the shadow of his hat. He held a smoking pistol aimed steadily at the other outlaws. "This ain't your business, Madron," one of them growled. "It is now," the man replied. "I don't take kindly to men who hurt women. Now back away before I put a bullet in each of you." There was something in his voice, a quiet confidence, an unwavering conviction, that made Lillian believe he would do exactly as he threatened. The outlaws must have believed it too. They backed away, helping Jeb onto his horse. "You'll regret this, Madron. The Blackwell gang doesn't forget." "Neither do I," the man said calmly. Once the gang had ridden off, the stranger dismounted and approached Lillian. Up close, she could see his face clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 29. His face was tanned from the sun, with several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a warm, deep brown that didn't match the dangerous reputation his name seemed to carry. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, offering his hand to help her up. "I'm fine," Lillian said, accepting his assistance. "Thank you for your help, Mr. "Just passing through," he said, avoiding giving his name. "Is there anyone else in the coach?" "Mrs. Peterson," Lillian gasped, suddenly remembering the older woman. They found Mrs. Peterson inside, shaken but unhurt. "The driver?" Lillian asked. "The—" man shook his head. "I'm sorry." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. She'd known the driver, Tom, for years. He had a wife and 2 young children in Prospect's End. "I can take you both to town," the stranger offered. "It's not far." "Thank you," Lillian said. "I'm Lillian Ashcroft." Something flickered in the man's eyes at the mention of her name. "Ashcroft? Any relation to Judge Ashcroft?" "He's my father." The man nodded slowly. "I see." He helped Mrs. Peterson onto his horse, then offered his hand to Lillian again. "You can ride with me. I'll walk alongside." As they started toward town, Lillian studied their rescuer. There was something both dangerous and gentle about him. "You never told me your name," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then tipped his hat. "Better that you don't know, Miss Ashcroft. Your father wouldn't approve of the company you're keeping." You saved our lives, Lillian protested. My father would want to thank you properly. Wry's smile touched his lips. Trust me, your father and I have different views on what's proper. They continued in silence for a while. Those men, Lillian finally said, they called you Madron. He didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. I've heard that name, she continued. Colt Madron. They say you rob trains. People say a lot of things, he replied. Not all of them true. Before Lillian could ask anything else, they crested a hill, and Prospect's End came into view. The small town nestled in the valley, with the courthouse standing tall at its center. I'll take you as far as the edge of town, Colt said. Someone can come back for the stage and for Tom. As they reached the outskirts, Colt helped Mrs. Peterson down from his horse. Thank you again, Lillian said as he offered his hand to help her dismount. When their fingers touched, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. Take care, Miss Ashcroft, he said softly. Then, with a tip of his hat, he mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the mesquite before she could say another word. 2 months later, Lillian sat beside her father in the courtroom. The room was packed with townspeople eager to witness the trial of the notorious Colt Madron, captured at last. Judge Harold Ashcroft adjusted his black robes and studied the papers before him. At 60, he was still an imposing figure, with his broad shoulders and stern expression. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Lillian, you don't need to stay for this, he said quietly. It will likely be unpleasant. I want to stay, Father, Lillian replied. I want to understand how the law works. The truth was, she had heard the name of the prisoner and felt compelled to see if it was truly the man who had saved her life. She hadn't told her father about the incident. He would have been furious to know she'd been in the company of an outlaw, even one who had rescued her. The side door opened, and the sheriff led in the prisoner. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. It was him, Colt Madron. He looked different now. His face was bruised, his clothes dirty, and his hands were shackled in front of him. But his eyes were the same. Those deep brown eyes that had looked at her with such kindness. Colt Madron, her father's voice boomed through the courtroom. You stand accused of train robbery, assault, and murder. How do you plead? Not guilty to murder, Your Honor, Colt said, his voice steady. I've done things I'm not proud of, but I've never killed a man. Lillian watched as her father's expression hardened. The evidence suggests otherwise, Mr. Madron, but we'll let the jury decide. As her father continued reading the charges, Colt's gaze drifted over the courtroom. When his eyes met Lillian's, she saw the moment of recognition. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something else, something that made her heart beat faster. The trial proceeded with witness after witness describing Colt's crimes. The prosecutor painted him as a dangerous criminal, the leader of a gang that had terrorized the territory for years. He held up the Eastern Express just 2 months ago, the prosecutor declared. Shot the guard in cold blood. That's a lie. Colt interrupted, earning a stern rebuke from Judge Ashcroft. You will speak only when addressed, Mr. Madron. Colt clenched his jaw but nodded. His eyes found Lillian's again, and in them she saw a silent plea. He was telling the truth, she realized. He hadn't killed anyone. When the court recessed for lunch, Lillian approached her father in his chambers. Father, do you truly believe that man is guilty of murder? Judge Ashcroft looked up from his papers. The evidence is compelling, Lillian. Multiple witnesses place him at the scene. But what if they're mistaken or lying? Her father's brow furrowed. Why this sudden interest in the case? Lillian hesitated. I just want to be sure justice is served. Justice is precisely what I intend to deliver, he replied firmly. A judge's daughter must be as clean as the sentence. Remember that, Lillian. We uphold the law without bias or emotion. Lillian nodded, but as she left her father's chambers, she couldn't stop thinking about Colt, about how he had saved her life without asking for anything in return, about how he had treated her with respect and kindness when he could have taken advantage of the situation. That night she lay awake in her bed, memories of the stagecoach attack replaying in her mind. The outlaws had called themselves the Blackwell Gang, not Colt's gang. And the prosecutor claimed Colt had robbed a train 2 months ago, the same time he had rescued her. Something wasn't right. The pieces didn't fit. The next morning, Lillian visited the sheriff's office while her father was preparing for court. "Sheriff Taylor," she greeted the middle-aged man behind the desk. "I was wondering if I might speak with the prisoner." The sheriff looked up in surprise. "Miss Ashcroft, why would you want to do that?" "I'm bringing him some books," Lillian said, holding up the volumes she'd selected from her father's library. "I thought he might appreciate something to read." Sheriff Taylor frowned. "Your father wouldn't approve." "My father believes in treating all men with dignity, even prisoners," Lillian replied. "Surely there's no harm in providing books." After a moment's hesitation, the sheriff nodded. "5 minutes, Miss Ashcroft, and I'll be right outside the door." He led her to the cell where Colt was being held. When Colt saw her, he stood up from the small cot, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Ashcroft," he said quietly. "Mr. Madron," she replied. "I've brought you some books." Sheriff Taylor unlocked the cell door. 5 minutes, he reminded her, then stepped outside. Once they were alone, Colt spoke in a low voice. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to speak with you," Lillian said, "about the day we met." Colt's expression softened. "I didn't think I'd see you again, especially not here." "You saved my life," Lillian said, "and now you're being tried for murder." "A murder I didn't commit," Colt said firmly. "The prosecutor says you robbed the Eastern Express 2 months ago, that you shot the guard." Colt shook his head. "I was nowhere near that train. You were saving me from the Blackwell gang," Lillian finished for him. Their eyes met, and Lillian felt that same flutter in her chest. "Why didn't you tell your father?" Colt asked. "I didn't want him to know I'd been in danger," Lillian admitted. "And I wasn't sure what to say about you." Colt moved closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Ashcroft, Lillian, you should stay away from me. Your father is determined to see me hang, and being seen with me will only cause trouble for you." "But you're innocent," Lillian insisted, "at least of the murder." A sad smile touched Colt's lips. "I've done enough wrong in my life to deserve punishment, but I've never taken a life, and I won't be hanged for something I didn't do." "Then let me help you," Lillian pleaded. "I can testify that you were with me when the train was robbed." Colt shook his head. "And admit to your father that you were alone with a known criminal? He'd never forgive you." Before Lillian could respond, the door opened and Sheriff Taylor stepped in. "Time's up, Miss Ashcroft." Lillian reluctantly moved toward the door, but Colt caught her hand. "Thank you for the books," he said, his fingers warm against hers, "and for believing me." As Lillian left the jail, her mind was racing. She had to find a way to help Colt without betraying her father's trust. But how? The trial resumed that afternoon, with more witnesses testifying against Colt. Lillian watched from her seat beside her father, her heart growing heavier with each damning statement. When court adjourned for the day, Judge Ashcroft turned to his daughter. "You're unusually quiet, Lillian." "Just thinking about the case," she replied. Her father studied her face. "Remember what I've always taught you. The law is clear. It doesn't bend for anyone, no matter how compelling they might seem." Lillian looked up sharply. Had he noticed the way she watched Colt? "I understand, Father," she said softly. That night, as she prepared for bed, Lillian made a decision. She would visit Colt again tomorrow. She would find out the truth about his past, about the gang he'd supposedly led. And then she would decide what to do, because something told her that Colt Madron was not the man everyone believed him to be, and she couldn't let an innocent man hang, even if it meant going against her father's wishes. As she blew out her candle, Lillian whispered a prayer, for justice, for truth, and for the man with the kind brown eyes who had saved her life. The courthouse was already packed when Lillian arrived the next morning. People from all over the county had come to witness the trial of the notorious Colt Madron. She smoothed her pale green dress and took her seat beside her father's empty chair. Martha Wilson, the town gossip, leaned forward from the row behind. "Such a shame, isn't it? A handsome man like that turning to crime." "The trial isn't over yet, Mrs. Wilson," Lillian replied, keeping her voice even. "We don't know if he's guilty." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Everyone knows what he's done, dear." Your father will see justice served. Lillian bit her tongue. Her father hadn't always been this rigid. Before her mother died 10 years ago, he had been different, more willing to see the good in people. But grief had hardened him, turned him into a man who saw only black and white, right and wrong. No shades of grey, no room for mercy. The side door opened, and Colt was led in by Sheriff Taylor. His eyes immediately found Lillian's, and something passed between them. Not fear, not guilt, something like fate. Judge Ashcroft entered and took his seat. "Court is in session," he announced. "The prosecution may call its next witness." The prosecutor, a thin man named Gerald Simmons, stood. "The prosecution calls Sheriff Taylor to the stand." Sheriff Taylor was sworn in and took the witness chair. "Sheriff, please tell the court about the defendant's capture," Simmons requested. Taylor cleared his throat. "We received information that Madron was hiding at an abandoned ranch about 20 miles outside of town. Me and my deputies surrounded the place at dawn. He didn't resist arrest, which surprised us considering his reputation." "And what items were found in his possession?" Simmons asked. "A Colt revolver, about $50 in cash, and a pocket watch that was identified as belonging to the guard from the Eastern Express robbery." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Lillian watched Colt's face carefully. He showed no reaction, but his hands tightened into fists. "No further questions," Simmons said, returning to his seat. The defense attorney, a young man named Thomas Reed, who had been appointed by the court, stood nervously. He had only been practicing law for 2 years, and this was his first major case. "Sheriff Taylor," Reed began, "you said the defendant didn't resist arrest. Does that seem like the behavior of a guilty man?" "Objection," Simmons called out. "Calls for speculation." "Sustained," Judge Ashcroft ruled. Reed tried another approach. "Sheriff, was there any blood found on the defendant's clothing or personal items?" "No, but the robbery was 2 months ago. Plenty of time to get rid of bloody clothes." "No further questions," Reed said, deflated. Lillian could see that Colt's appointed lawyer was out of his depth. The evidence was circumstantial, but Reed didn't know how to challenge it effectively. The trial continued throughout the morning. When the court recessed for lunch, Lillian slipped away from her father and headed to the jail. "Miss Ashcroft?" Sheriff Taylor greeted her with surprise. "Back with more books?" "Yes," Lillian replied, holding up a volume. "I thought Mr. Madron might appreciate something to pass the time." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Once they were alone, Colt approached the bars of his cell. "So you shouldn't be here, Lillian." "I had to come," she said. "The pocket watch they found on you—" "No, it's not what they think," Colt interrupted. "I didn't take it from any guard." "Then how did you get it?" Colt ran a hand through his dark hair. "I won it in a poker game in Silverdale, from a man named Frank Jenkins. He's part of the Blackwell gang, the same men who attacked your stagecoach." "The Blackwell gang," Lillian repeated. "The ones you drove away when you saved me." Colt nodded. "They're the ones who robbed the Eastern Express. They're trying to pin it on me." "Why would they do that?" A shadow crossed Colt's face. "Because I left them. I used to ride with them years ago. I was young and stupid, angry at the world. But I never killed anyone. I realized I couldn't live that life anymore, so I left. Jack Blackwell doesn't take kindly to deserters." Lillian absorbed this information. "So you were an outlaw?" "I was," Colt admitted. "I've robbed stagecoaches and trains. I've stolen and cheated. I'm not claiming to be innocent of everything, Lillian. Just the murder." His honesty touched her. He could have lied, tried to make himself seem better than he was. But he didn't. "We need to find this Frank Jenkins," Lillian said. "If he testifies that he gave you the watch—" "He won't," Colt said. "He's loyal to Blackwell, and even if he wasn't, your father would never accept the word of one criminal over another." "Then what about me?" "I can testify that you were with me when the Eastern Express was robbed." Colt shook his head. "Your father would never let you testify. And even if he did, it would only prove I wasn't on the train. Not that I didn't plan the robbery or order the killing." Lillian felt frustration building inside her. "There must be something we can do." Colt reached through the bars and took her hand. His touch sent warmth through her entire body. "Why are you trying to help me?" he asked softly. You barely know me. How you saved my life, she replied. Is that the only reason? Lillian looked into his eyes. No, she whispered. The door opened and Sheriff Taylor stepped in. Time's up, Miss Ashcroft. Reluctantly, Lillian pulled her hand away. I'll find a way. To help you, she promised Colt before leaving. As she walked back to the courthouse, Lillian's mind raced. If she could find evidence that the Blackwell gang was responsible for the Eastern Express robbery, she might be able to save Colt. When she returned to the courtroom, her father was already on the bench. He gave her a questioning look, but said nothing about her absence. The afternoon session began with the prosecution calling its final witness, a passenger from the Eastern Express, who claimed to have seen Colt shoot the guard. It was him. The witness, a well-dressed businessman named Howard Graham, insisted. I saw his face clearly in the lantern light. He shot the guard without hesitation. Lillian studied the man carefully. There was something rehearsed about his testimony, something that didn't ring true. When the defense attorney cross-examined Graham, he asked only a few basic questions before giving up. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom that the case against Colt was strong. After court adjourned for the day, Lillian joined her father for dinner at their home, a large two-story house near the courthouse. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Baker, had prepared roast beef, Lillian's father's favorite. You seem troubled, Lillian, Judge Ashcroft observed as they ate. Is it the trial? Yes, Lillian admitted. I'm not convinced of Madron's guilt. Her father set down his fork. The evidence is substantial. But what if the witnesses are mistaken? Or lying? Do you have reason to believe they are? He asked sharply. Lillian hesitated. This was her chance to tell her father about the stagecoach attack, about how Colt had saved her, but something held her back. Her father would be furious that she had kept such an important event from him, and he might see her interest in Colt's case as inappropriate, perhaps even remove her from the courtroom. I just think everyone deserves a fair trial, she said instead. And he's getting one, her father replied firmly. The law is clear, Lillian. If he's found guilty, he will face the consequences of his actions. Even if those consequences are hanging? Lillian asked quietly. Her father's eyes hardened. Justice doesn't bend even for the young or the handsome. Lillian felt her cheeks flush. So he had noticed her interest in Colt. I'm not asking for justice to bend, Father, just for it to be absolutely certain. Judge Ashcroft studied his daughter's face. You've always had a soft heart, Lillian, like your mother. But in matters of the law, the heart must yield to reason. After dinner, Lillian retreated to her room. She couldn't stop thinking about Colt, about the gentle way he had held her hand, about the honesty in his eyes when he admitted his past wrongs. She sat at her writing desk and penned a note to her childhood friend, Sarah Bennett, who now worked at the telegraph office in Silverdale. If anyone could help her find information about Frank Jenkins or the Blackwell gang, it would be Sarah. The next morning, Lillian gave the letter to Ben, the young man who delivered mail between Prospect's End and Silverdale. This is urgent. Ben, can you make sure Sarah gets it today? Of course, Miss Ashcroft, Ben replied, tipping his hat. The third day of the trial began with closing arguments. The prosecutor painted Colt as a dangerous criminal who had graduated from theft to murder. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Simmons concluded, the evidence is clear. Colt Madron robbed the Eastern Express and shot guard Thomas Wilson in cold blood. Justice demands that he pay for this heinous crime with his life. The defense attorney's closing argument was brief and uninspiring. He simply reminded the jury that they must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of Colt's guilt. When both sides had finished, Judge Ashcroft addressed the jury. You have heard the evidence. You will now retire to deliberate your verdict. Court is adjourned until you reach a decision. As the courtroom emptied, Lillian caught Colt's eye. He gave her a small, sad smile, as if he had already accepted his fate. Lillian couldn't bear the thought of him giving up. She had to do something, and quickly. While the jury deliberated, Lillian returned to the jail. This time, she didn't bring any books. Miss Ashcroft, Sheriff Taylor greeted her. I'm afraid I can't let you see the prisoner today, your father's orders. Lillian's heart sank. Please, Sheriff, just for a moment. I'm sorry, Miss Lillian. The judge was very clear. Disappointed, Lillian turned to leave when she noticed a wanted poster on the sheriff's desk. It showed a rough sketch of a man with the name Jack Blackwell printed beneath it. "Is that the leader of the Blackwell gang?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Sheriff Taylor nodded. "Nasty piece of work. Been trying to catch him for years." "Have they been active around here recently?" The sheriff gave her a curious look. "There was a stagecoach robbery about 2 months back. Driver was killed. We think it was them." "Was anyone else hurt?" Lillian asked, her heart beating faster. "No, thankfully. The passengers were shaken up, but unharmed. Strange thing is, they said another outlaw showed up and drove the Blackwell gang away. Did they say who it was?" Sheriff Taylor shook his head. "Just some lone rider. Why all the questions, Miss Lillian?" "Just curious," she replied. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff." As Lillian left the jail, her mind was working furiously. The sheriff had just confirmed that the Blackwell gang had attacked her stagecoach and that Colt had intervened. If she could find the other passenger, Mrs. Peterson, perhaps she would be willing to testify about what happened. Lillian hurried to Mrs. Peterson's small house on the edge of town. The elderly woman was surprised to see her, but welcomed her warmly. "Mrs. Peterson," Lillian said after they were seated with tea, "I need to ask you about the stagecoach attack." Mrs. Peterson's hands trembled slightly. "Such a terrible day. I still have nightmares about it. Do you remember the man who saved us? The one who drove the outlaws away?" "Of course, such a brave young man." Mrs. Peterson's eyes narrowed. "Wait, is he the one on trial, the one they call Colt Madron?" Lillian nodded. "Yes, and he's being accused of a murder he didn't commit." Mrs. Peterson set down her teacup. "That can't be right. He saved our lives." "Would you be willing to testify to that in court?" Lillian asked eagerly. The older woman hesitated. "Your father. He's a good man, but he's strict. He might not like me speaking up for an outlaw." "But it's the truth," Lillian insisted. "And the truth is what the court is supposed to find." After a moment's thought, Mrs. Peterson nodded. "You're right, dear. If that young man saved our lives, the least I can do is tell the truth about it." Relief flooded through Lillian. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. The jury is deliberating now. We need to go to the courthouse immediately." As they hurried to the courthouse, Lillian prayed they weren't too late. The jury had been out for several hours already, which meant they could return with a verdict at any moment. When they arrived, the courtroom was still empty except for the clerk, who was organizing papers at his desk. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Lillian asked breathlessly. "Not yet, Miss Ashcroft," the clerk replied, "but they've sent word they're close." "I need to speak with my father right away," Lillian said. "It's urgent." The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "He's in his chambers." Lillian led Mrs. Peterson to her father's office and knocked firmly on the door. "Enter," came her father's voice. Judge Ashcroft looked up in surprise when Lillian and Mrs. Peterson walked in. "Lillian? Mrs. Peterson? What is the meaning of this?" "Father, we have important information about Colt Madron," Lillian said. "Information that could affect the verdict." Her father's expression hardened. "The jury is deliberating, Lillian. It's too late for new evidence." "It's never too late for the truth," Lillian countered. "Please, just listen to what Mrs. Peterson has to say." Judge Ashcroft glanced at the elderly woman, then sighed. "Very well, what is it, Mrs. Peterson?" Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "Your Honor, 2 months ago I was traveling on the stagecoach from Silverdale with your daughter when we were attacked by the Blackwell gang." Judge Ashcroft's eyes widened in shock. "What? Lillian, you never told me." "Please, Father, let her finish," Lillian interrupted. Mrs. Peterson continued. "The driver was killed and they were about to take us captive when a young man rode up and drove them away. He saved our lives. That man was Colt Madron." The judge turned to his daughter. "Is this true, Lillian?" "Yes, Father," Lillian admitted. "Colt Madron saved my life, and he did it on the same day the Eastern Express was robbed. He couldn't have been in 2 places at once." Judge Ashcroft sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I was afraid," Lillian said softly. "Afraid you would be angry that I had been in danger. Afraid you wouldn't believe me because of who Colt is." Her father was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up. "This testimony must be heard by the jury. Mrs. Peterson, are you willing?" To state under oath what you've just told me? I am, Your Honor, the elderly woman replied firmly. Then let's return to the courtroom, Judge Ashcroft said. I'll recall the jury. As they walked back to the courtroom, Lillian felt a surge of hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late to save Colt after all. The clerk was instructed to bring the jury back, and Sheriff Taylor was sent to fetch Colt from his cell. While they waited, Lillian sat nervously, praying that her father would do the right thing. When Colt was led into the courtroom, his eyes immediately found Lillian's. She gave him a small smile, trying to convey that there was still hope. The jury filed in, looking confused about being recalled. Judge Ashcroft addressed them. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I apologize for the interruption of your deliberations. However, new evidence has come to light that you must consider before reaching your verdict. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. So is condemning an innocent man, Mr. Simmons. Judge Ashcroft replied sharply. Mrs. Peterson will now testify. Mrs. Peterson was sworn in and recounted the story of the stagecoach attack and how Colt had saved them. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, every eye on her weathered face as she described Colt's bravery. He could have just ridden past, she concluded. But he stopped. He risked his life for two strangers. That doesn't sound like a cold-blooded killer to me. When Mrs. Peterson finished, Judge Ashcroft turned to his daughter. Miss Ashcroft, do you wish to testify as well? Lillian stood, her heart pounding. I do, Father. After being sworn in, Lillian told the court about the attack, about how Colt had driven off the Blackwell gang, and about how he had escorted them safely to the edge of town. The Eastern Express was robbed that same day, she concluded. Colt Madron couldn't have been on that train, he was with me. The prosecutor cross-examined both women, trying to shake their testimony, but they remained firm. The jury listened, intently, their expressions thoughtful. When both women had finished testifying, Judge Ashcroft addressed the jury again. You have heard this new evidence. You will now return to your deliberations, taking this testimony into account. As the jury filed out, Colt was led back to his cell. But before he left the courtroom, he looked at Lillian one last time. In his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope. The waiting was agony. Lillian sat in the courtroom, unable to leave, needing to be there when the verdict was announced. Her father remained on the bench, his face impassive. After what seemed like an eternity, the jury returned. The foreman handed a slip of paper to the clerk, who gave it to Judge Ashcroft. Her father read it silently, his expression giving nothing. Away. Then he looked up. Has the jury reached a verdict? He asked formally. We have, Your Honor, the foreman replied. The courtroom held its breath. Lillian's heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. In the matter of the murder of guard Thomas Wilson, how do you find? The foreman stood tall. We find the defendant, Colt Madron, not guilty. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Lillian felt tears of relief spring to her eyes, but her father wasn't finished. And in the matter of the robbery of the Eastern Express? Guilty, Your Honor. Lillian's joy faltered. Colt had admitted to being an outlaw in the past. He wasn't. Innocent of everything. Judge Ashcroft nodded. Colt Madron, you have been found not guilty of murder, but guilty of robbery. I hereby sentence you to 5 years in the territorial prison. 5 years. Not hanging, but still a harsh punishment. Lillian watched as Colt was led away, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. He was alive. That was what mattered most. But 5 years was a long time. As the courtroom emptied, her father approached her. You should have told me, Lillian. I know, Father. I'm sorry. Judge Ashcroft studied his daughter's face. You care for him, don't you? Lillian couldn't lie. Yes, her father sighed. He's still a criminal, Lillian. He's admitted to robbery. People can change, Father, Lillian said quietly. Sometimes they just need a reason to. Her father didn't respond to that. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Go home, Lillian. It's been a long day. But Lillian had one more thing to do before she went home. One more person to see. As her father left the courthouse, Lillian made her way to the jail for what might be the last time. The jail was quiet as Sheriff Taylor led Lillian to Colt's cell. Most of the townspeople had gone home or to the saloon to discuss the surprising verdict. 5 minutes, the sheriff said, unlocking the cell door. That's all I can give you, Miss Ashcroft. Thank you, Lillian replied. When the sheriff stepped outside, Colt moved toward her. You saved my life, he said softly. I only told the truth, Lillian answered. You risked your father's anger for me. Why? Lillian looked into his eyes. Because I believe in you. I believe you can be good. Colt reached out and took her hands in his. 5 years is a long time, Lillian. I'll wait, she said without hesitation. Surprise flickered across his face. You'd wait for an outlaw, for a man who's trying to change, for a man who saved my life without asking for anything in return. Lillian squeezed his hands. For you. Colt's eyes softened. I don't deserve you. Let me decide what I deserve, Lillian replied with a small smile. They stood in silence for a moment, just holding hands, memorizing each other's faces. When do they take you to the territorial prison? Lillian finally asked. Tomorrow morning, Colt said. Early, Lillian nodded, trying to hide her sadness. I'll write to you. I'd like that. Colt hesitated, then added, I never learned to read very well. My pa thought school was a waste of time. But I'll learn, for your letters. The admission touched Lillian deeply. I'll help you. I can send books with my letters, Colt smiled. I'd like that too. They heard the sheriff's boots in the corridor, signaling that their time was almost up. Colt, Lillian said quickly, I need to know something. Why did you save me that day? You could have just ridden past. Colt's expression grew serious. Because I was tired of being the man everyone thought I was. I wanted to be better. He paused. And then I saw you, and I knew I couldn't let anything happen to you. The cell door opened and Sheriff Taylor stepped in. Time's up, Miss Ashcroft. Lillian nodded, but before she could move away, Colt leaned forward and kissed her cheek. I'll be counting the days, he whispered. As Lillian left the jail, her cheek still warm from Colt's kiss, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. 5 years was indeed a long time, but some things were worth waiting for. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Lillian arrived at the sheriff's office. A prison wagon was parked outside, 2 armed guards standing beside it. Sheriff Taylor looked surprised to see her. Miss Ashcroft? What are you doing here so early? I came to say goodbye, Lillian replied simply. The sheriff shook his head. Your father wouldn't approve. My father doesn't need to know. After a moment's hesitation, Sheriff Taylor nodded. They're bringing him out now. You can have 1 minute. Colt emerged from the jail, his hands and feet shackled. When he saw Lillian, his steps faltered. I had to come, she said, moving toward him. I'm glad you did, he replied. The guards watched suspiciously as Lillian approached. I brought you something, she said, pulling a small book from her purse. To help you with your reading. Colt looked at the book, then at Lillian. Thank you. One of the guards stepped forward. He can't take personal items with him until they're inspected at the prison. It's just a book, Lillian protested. Rules. Our rules, miss, the guard replied, taking the book from her. If it passes inspection, he'll get it. Lillian nodded in understanding. Then take this too, she said, removing a small photograph from her purse. It was a portrait of her taken on her 25th birthday. So he won't forget what I look like. The guard took the photograph with a hint of sympathy in his eyes. I'll make sure he gets it if it's approved. Time to go, the other guard announced, guiding Colt toward the wagon. Wait, Lillian called out. She stepped forward and, ignoring the guard's disapproving looks, kissed Colt gently on the lips. Now you can go. Colt's eyes were bright as he was led to the wagon. I'll write as soon as I can, he promised. Lillian stood in the street, watching as the wagon pulled away, taking Colt from her. She remained there until it disappeared from sight, the dust settling on the road ahead. As she turned to walk home, she saw her father standing across the street, watching her. His expression was unreadable. Father, she said, approaching him. Lillian, he replied. I thought I might find you here. She lifted her chin, ready to defend her actions, but Judge Ashcroft simply offered his arm. Let's walk home together. Surprised, Lillian took his arm and they began the short walk to their house. "You care deeply for him," her father said after a while. It wasn't a question. "I do," Lillian admitted. "He's not the man I would have chosen for you." "I know." They walked in silence for a few more steps. "Your mother would have liked him," Judge Ashcroft said unexpectedly. Lillian looked at her father in surprise. "She would?" She always had a soft spot for those trying to change their lives. A small smile touched his lips. "That's how she ended up with me, after all." "What do you mean?" Judge Ashcroft's eyes grew distant with memory. "I wasn't always the man you know, Lillian. In my youth, I was reckless. Your mother saw something in me that others didn't. She believed I could be better, and for her, I was." Lillian had never heard this story before. Her father rarely spoke of her mother, the pain of her loss still too raw even after 10 years. 5 years is a long time, her father continued. "People change, sometimes for the better, sometimes not." "I believe in him," Lillian said firmly. "Judge," Ashcroft patted her hand, "then I hope for your sake that your faith is rewarded." The first letter arrived 3 weeks later. The handwriting was awkward, the words simple, but to Lillian it was more precious than any poetry. "Dear Lillian, I got your picture. The guard gave it to me after they checked it. I keep it with me all the time. I'm learning to read better. One of the other men here used to be a school teacher. He's helping me. The book you sent got here yesterday. I'm going to start reading it tonight. It's hard here, but thinking of you makes it easier. 5 years doesn't seem so long when I think about seeing you at the end of it." Yours, Colt. Lillian wrote back immediately, sending another book with her letter. She told him about her days, about the small happenings in Prospect's End, about her hope for their future, and so began their correspondence. Week after week, month after month, their letters traveled between Prospect's End and the territorial prison. With each letter, Colt's writing improved, his thoughts becoming more complex, his words more confident. 6 months after Colt went to prison, Lillian received an unexpected visitor. She was reading in the garden when Mrs. Baker announced that a Mr. Reed wished to see her. Thomas Reed, Colt's defense attorney, entered the garden looking nervous. "Miss Ashcroft," he greeted her. "Thank you for seeing me." "Mr. Reed," Lillian replied, setting aside her book. "What brings you here?" Reed sat on the bench beside her. "I've been investigating the Eastern Express robbery on my own time. I believe Colt Madron was set up by the Blackwell gang." Lillian's heart quickened. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet," Reed admitted. "But I've found witnesses who saw Jack Blackwell near the train just before the robbery. And I've been tracking a pocket watch identical to the one found on Colt. It was in Jack Blackwell's possession after the robbery. Have you told the sheriff?" Reed shook his head. "Not yet. The evidence is still circumstantial, but I thought you should know." "Why are you doing this?" Lillian asked. "The trial is over." Reed looked down at his hands. "Because I failed him. I was supposed to defend him, but I was too inexperienced, too intimidated. I want to make it right." Lillian studied the young lawyer. "What can I do to help?" "I need to find Frank Jenkins," Reed said. "Colt mentioned him in his testimony. If we can get him to admit that he gave Colt the pocket watch in a poker game, I might know how to find him," Lillian interrupted. "My friend Sarah works at the telegraph office in Silverdale. She hears all the gossip. If Jenkins is there, she'll know about it." Reed's face lit up. "That would be extremely helpful, Miss Ashcroft. I'll write to her today," Lillian promised. After Reed left, Lillian penned a letter to Sarah, explaining the situation and asking for her help in locating Frank Jenkins. She also wrote to Colt, telling him about Reed's visit and their plan. Colt's reply came 2 weeks later, along with a pressed wildflower he'd found in the prison yard. "Dear Lillian, be careful. The Blackwell gang is dangerous. If they find out you're looking for them, they might come after you. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you because of me. The flower reminded me of you, beautiful and strong enough to grow even in a place like this. I miss you more each day, always yours." Colt. Lillian pressed the letter and flower into the journal, where she kept all of Colt's letters. His concern for her safety touched her deeply, but she couldn't give up. If there was a chance to clear his name completely, to reduce his sentence, she had to try. Sarah's reply arrived a few days later. She had heard rumors of Frank Jenkins frequenting a saloon in Silverdale called the Lucky Strike. According to local gossip, he had fallen out with Jack Blackwell and was now drinking away what money he had left. Lillian immediately wrote to Reed with this information. The young lawyer promised to visit Silverdale as soon as possible to find Jenkins. 2 months passed with no word from Reed. Lillian continued her correspondence with Colt, her letters full of encouragement and plans for the future. His replies grew more eloquent, more open with his feelings for her. Then, on a crisp fall morning nearly a year after Colt's trial, Lillian was surprised to see her father enter the dining room for breakfast with a troubled expression. "What's wrong, Father?" she asked as Mrs. Baker poured coffee for them both. "Thomas Reed is dead," Judge Ashcroft said bluntly. Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "Dead? How?" "Shot in the back in Silverdale," her father replied. "Sheriff Taylor just received word. They found him in an alley behind the Lucky Strike saloon." The Lucky Strike, where Frank Jenkins was known to drink. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Was anyone arrested?" Lillian asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Judge Ashcroft shook his head. "No witnesses have come forward." Lillian's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. Reed had been killed because he was getting too close to the truth. The Blackwell gang was silencing anyone who threatened them. "There's something else," her father continued. "They found this in Reed's pocket." He pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Lillian. It was a letter addressed to her in Reed's handwriting. Lillian opened it with shaking fingers. "Miss Ashcroft, I found Jenkins. He admitted that he gave the watch to Colt in a poker game. He's willing to sign a statement to that effect. I'm meeting him tonight to get it in writing. If all goes well, I'll have the evidence we need to clear Colt's name and reduce his sentence. I'll come to Prospect's End tomorrow with the statement." Thomas Reed tears filled Lillian's eyes. Reed had been so close to proving Colt's innocence. "Did you know about this?" Judge Ashcroft asked quietly. Lillian nodded. "Reed came to me months ago. He believed Colt was set up by the Blackwell gang. He was trying to find evidence. And now he's dead," her father said grimly. "Lillian, I want you to promise me you'll stay out of this. The Blackwell gang is dangerous. I won't have you putting yourself at risk. But Father, promise me, Lillian." His voice was stern, his eyes worried. "Your mother would never forgive me if anything happened to you." Reluctantly, Lillian nodded. "I promise." But in her heart, she knew she couldn't give up. Reed had died trying to help Colt. She owed it to both of them to continue the search for the truth. That night, Lillian wrote to Colt, telling him about Reed's death and the letter. She didn't mention her plans to continue the investigation. She didn't want him to worry. Days passed with no reply from Colt, then weeks. Lillian wrote again, wondering if her first letter had been lost. Still nothing. Finally, after a month of silence, a letter arrived. But it wasn't from Colt. It was from the prison warden. "Dear Miss Ashcroft, I regret to inform you that prisoner Colt Madron was seriously injured in a fight with another inmate. He is currently in the prison infirmary. Due to his condition, he is unable to write at this time. Prison regulations allow for family visits in cases of serious illness. If you wish to visit prisoner Madron, you may do so with proper authorization. Respectfully, Warden James Wilson." Lillian's hands shook as she read the letter. Colt was hurt, possibly dying, and she was miles away. She had to go to him. She found her father in his study reviewing case notes. "Father," she said, handing him the letter, "I need to go to the territorial prison." Judge Ashcroft read the letter, his face grave. "Lillian, it's a 3-day journey, and the prison is no place for a woman alone." "I'm not asking for permission," Lillian said firmly. "I'm going, with or without your blessing." Her father studied her face, seeing the determination in her eyes. It was the same look her mother had had when her mind was made up. "At least let me arrange an escort for you," he said finally, "and I'll write a letter of authorization. It will carry more weight coming from a judge." Relief flooded through Lillian. "Thank you, Father." "You truly love him, don't you?" Judge Ashcroft asked softly. "With all my heart," Lillian replied. Her father sighed. "Then go to him. But be careful, Lillian. The world is not always kind to those who follow their hearts." 2 days later, Lillian boarded the train to the territorial capital where the prison was located. Sheriff Taylor accompanied her, at her father's insistence. The journey was long and uncomfortable, but Lillian barely noticed. Her thoughts were with Colt, praying that he would be all right, that she wouldn't be too late. They arrived at the prison on the afternoon of the third day. It was a forbidding structure of grey stone walls and iron bars. Lillian felt a chill as they approached the main gate. The guard at the entrance examined their papers carefully, then called for an escort to take them to the warden's office. Warden. Wilson was a stern-faced man with greying hair and cold eyes. "Miss Ashcroft," he greeted her, "I received your father's letter. You may see the prisoner, but only for 15 minutes. "How is he?" Lillian asked anxiously. "Recovering," the warden replied. "The doctor says he'll live, though he was touch and go for a while. The other inmate stabbed him 3 times with a makeshift knife." Lillian felt sick at the thought of Colt bleeding, in pain, believing he might die alone. "Take her to the infirmary," the warden instructed a guard. "Sheriff Taylor can wait here." The prison infirmary was a long room with beds lined up against both walls. Most were empty, but at the far end Lillian could see a figure lying still beneath a thin blanket. As she approached, her heart in her throat, she saw that it was indeed Colt. His face was pale, with a large bruise on his cheek. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "Colt," she whispered, taking his hand gently. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment he seemed confused. Then recognition dawned, and a weak smile touched his lips. "Lillian," he murmured, "am I dreaming?" "No," she replied, tears filling her eyes. "I'm really here. You came all this way." He tried to sit up but winced in pain. "Don't try to move," Lillian said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You need to rest." Colt settled back, his eyes never leaving her face. "I thought I might die without seeing you again," he admitted. "It was my only regret." Lillian squeezed his hand. "You're not going to die. You're going to get better, and then you're going to finish your sentence, and then you're going to come back to me." A shadow crossed Colt's face. The man who did this. He was sent by Jack Blackwell. Lillian's blood ran cold. "How do you know?" "He told me before he attacked me. Said Blackwell sent regards." Colt's voice was bitter. "Reed got too close. They killed him, and they tried to kill me too." "But why now, after all this time?" "Because Blackwell's been caught," Colt explained. "He was arrested last month for another train robbery. He's being held in the jail in Silver City. He's trying to eliminate anyone who could testify against him." Lillian absorbed this information. Jack Blackwell was in custody. If they could get to him, make him confess. "Colt, if Blackwell confessed to the Eastern Express robbery, it would prove you were set up." "He'll never confess," Colt said wearily. "He'd rather hang than admit the truth." The guard who had escorted Lillian cleared his throat. "5 more minutes, miss." Lillian nodded, then turned back to Colt. "Don't give up hope. Reed found Frank Jenkins before he died. Jenkins admitted that he gave you the pocket watch in a poker game. We just need to find him again." "Lillian, promise." "Me, you'll stay out of this," Colt pleaded. "Blackwell's men are still out there. If they hurt you—" "I'll be careful," Lillian assured him. "But I can't give up, Colt. Not when we're so close to proving your innocence." Colt's eyes searched her face. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "That's why you love me," she replied with a small smile. "One of many reasons," he agreed. The guard stepped forward. "Time's up, miss." Lillian leaned down and kissed Colt gently. "I'll come back as soon as I can. Get stronger for me." "For you," Colt promised. "I'll do anything." As Lillian was led away, she looked back one last time. Colt was watching her, his eyes full of love and worry. She tried to memorize his face, to carry it with her until they could be together again. Outside the prison, Sheriff Taylor was waiting. "How is he?" he asked as they began the journey back to the train station. "Recovering," Lillian replied. "Sheriff, did you know that Jack Blackwell has been captured? He's in jail in Silver City." Taylor nodded. "I heard. They say he'll be transferred to the territorial capital for trial in a few weeks. We need to find Frank Jenkins," Lillian said firmly. "He can prove that Colt was set up." The sheriff gave her a sidelong look. "Miss Lillian, Your father asked me to keep you safe. Getting mixed up with the Blackwell gang isn't safe. I promised my father I wouldn't put myself in danger, Lillian replied. But I didn't promise to stop looking for the truth. Jenkins is the key, Sheriff. Reed found him once. We can find him again. Taylor sighed. You're as stubborn as your father, you know that? Lillian smiled. So I've been told. As they boarded the train for the long journey home, Lillian's mind was racing with plans. Jack Blackwell was in custody. Frank Jenkins was out there somewhere, possibly still in Silverdale. And she had promised Colt she would find a way to prove his innocence. The train pulled away from the station, steam billowing around it. Lillian watched the prison disappear from view, her heart heavy with the separation, but her spirit determined. 5 years was a long time. But with hope and determination, it might be much less. The autumn leaves were turning golden when Lillian returned to Prospect's End. The town looked the same, but Lillian felt changed by her visit to Colt. Seeing him wounded, vulnerable, had only strengthened her resolve to help him. Her father was waiting on the porch when the wagon pulled up to their house. How is he? Judge Ashcroft asked as he helped her down. Recovering, Lillian replied, but he's not safe there, Father. Jack Blackwell tried to have him killed. Judge Ashcroft's expression darkened. Come inside. We need to talk. In his study, her father poured them both a small glass of brandy. It was something he had never done before, treating her as an equal, an adult with concerns worth discussing seriously. Sheriff Taylor told me about your plan to find Frank Jenkins, he said, sitting behind his desk. It's too dangerous, Lillian. I have to try, she insisted. Colt doesn't deserve to be in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He admitted to being an outlaw in the past, her father reminded her. He's not innocent of everything. But he's trying to change, Lillian said. Doesn't that count for anything, Judge? Ashcroft was silent for a moment, studying his daughter's face. You remind me so much of your mother, he finally said. She always believed in second chances, too. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. I've been making some inquiries of my own. Jack Blackwell is indeed in custody in Silver City. He's scheduled to be transferred to the territorial capital next week for trial. Lillian looked at her father in surprise. You've been investigating? I'm still a judge, Lillian. It's my duty to ensure that justice is served. If Madrin was wrongly convicted, even partially, I need to know. Hope flared in Lillian's heart. Will you help me find Jenkins? Judge Ashcroft shook his head. No, but I'll do something better. I'll arrange for Blackwell to be brought here instead of the capital. He'll stand trial in my courtroom. Why would you do that? Because if anyone can get the truth out of that man, it's me, her father said, with grim determination. I've dealt with men like Blackwell my entire career. They all have weaknesses. We just need to find his. Lillian felt a rush of gratitude. Thank you, Father. Judge Ashcroft held up a hand. Don't thank me yet. Blackwell is unlikely to confess, and without Jenkins or other witnesses we may not be able to prove anything. Then I'll find Jenkins, Lillian said firmly. Her father sighed. I expected you'd say that, which is why I've asked Sheriff Taylor to accompany you to Silverdale. If Jenkins is still there, you'll need protection. Lillian was stunned. You're letting me go? You'd go with or without my permission, Judge Ashcroft replied with a wry smile. This way, at least I know you'll have someone watching out for you. Lillian crossed the room and hugged her father tightly. Thank you for understanding. I just want you to be happy, Lillian, he said softly. Even if your happiness lies with a reformed outlaw. The journey to Silverdale took a full day by stagecoach. Sheriff Taylor sat across from Lillian, his expression troubled. Your father will have my badge if anything happens to you, he said, as they neared the town. Nothing will happen, Lillian assured him. We're just going to talk to Jenkins. If he's even still in Silverdale. That's a big if, Taylor muttered. Men like Jenkins don't stay in one place too long. The Lucky Strike Saloon was on the outskirts of Silverdale, a weathered building with peeling paint and dirty windows. It was early afternoon when they arrived, and the saloon was mostly empty. The bartender eyed them suspiciously as they entered. We don't get many ladies in here, he said to Lillian. I'm looking for Frank Jenkins, she replied directly. I was told he frequents this establishment. The bartender's eyes narrowed. "What's your business with Jenkins?" Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, showing his badge. "Official business. Is he here or not?" "Haven't seen him in a couple of days," the bartender admitted. "Not since that lawyer was killed out back." "Do you know where he might be?" Lillian asked. Sutter, bartender shrugged. "He has a room at the boarding house down the street, Mrs. Cole's place, but like I said, he hasn't been around." They thanked the bartender and left, heading for the boarding house. Mrs. Cole, a stout woman with graying hair, confirmed that Jenkins had a room but hadn't returned to it in 3 days. "Left all his things," she said, showing them the small, cluttered room. "Didn't pay his rent either." Lillian surveyed the room. Clothes were strewn about and empty bottles littered the floor. On the rickety table by the window, she noticed a deck of playing cards and several letters. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the letters. Mrs. Cole nodded. "Take whatever you want. I'm clearing this room out tomorrow if he doesn't show up with my money." Lillian picked up the letters. They were all unopened, addressed to Frank Jenkins. The return address on one caught her eye. J. Blackwell, Silver City. "Sheriff," she said, showing him the letter. "It's from Blackwell." Taylor frowned. "Blackwell's been in jail for weeks. He couldn't have sent this recently." "Maybe it was sent before he was arrested," Lillian suggested. "Either way, it proves they know each other." They took the letter and continued their search for Jenkins. They visited every saloon, every boarding house, asking questions, showing Jenkins' photograph from the wanted poster Sheriff Taylor had brought. By evening, they had covered the entire town with no success. It seemed Jenkins had vanished. "Should head back to Prospect's End tomorrow," Taylor said as they ate dinner at the hotel. "Jenkins is gone, probably ran when he heard about Reed's murder." "We can't give up," Lillian insisted. "Not when we're so close." But she knew the sheriff was right. Without Jenkins, they had no proof that Colt had been set up. Just a letter that proved nothing except that Blackwell and Jenkins had corresponded. That night, as Lillian prepared for bed, there was a soft knock at her hotel room door. She opened it cautiously to find Sarah, her childhood friend, standing in the hallway. "Sarah," Lillian exclaimed, embracing her friend. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you were in town," Sarah replied, entering the room. "Word travels fast in Silverdale. You're looking for Frank Jenkins, aren't you?" Lillian nodded. "Do you know where he is?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "He left town 3 days ago, but before he did, he came to the telegraph office and sent a message. He seemed scared, Lillian, really scared." "Did you see what the message said?" Lillian asked eagerly. "It was addressed to someone named Ellis in Silver City. Jenkins said he was heading to his sister's place in Tucson and would stay there until it was all over." "Did he say what it was?" Sarah shook her head. "No, but he mentioned a trial. Said he wasn't going to testify no matter what anyone offered him." Lillian's heart sank. If Jenkins had fled to Tucson and was determined not to testify, their chances of proving Colt's innocence were slim. "There's something else," Sarah said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Jenkins dropped this when he was leaving. I picked it up, thinking it might be important." Lillian unfolded the paper. It was a receipt for a pocket watch, dated 2 months before the Eastern Express robbery. The receipt was made out to Jack Blackwell. "Sarah, this is exactly what we needed," Lillian exclaimed. "This proves that Blackwell owned the watch before the robbery, the same watch that was found on Colt." "Will it be enough?" Sarah asked. "With the letter from Blackwell to Jenkins, it might be," Lillian replied, hope rising in her chest. "Thank you, Sarah. You've been a true friend." The next morning, Lillian and Sheriff Taylor began the journey back to Prospect's End, the receipt and letter safely tucked in Lillian's purse. It wasn't as good as having Jenkins testify, but it was something. A thread of evidence that might help unravel the truth. When they arrived back in Prospect's End, they found the town in a state of excitement. Judge Ashcroft had announced that Jack Blackwell would be tried in his courtroom, and the notorious outlaw was due to arrive the following day under heavy guard. "Did you find Jenkins?" her father asked when Lillian returned home. "No, he's fled to Tucson," Lillian replied, "but we found these." She showed him the receipt and the letter. Judge Ashcroft examined them carefully. "Circumstantial," he said finally, "but interesting. The receipt proves Blackwell owned a watch, but not necessarily the same one found on Madron, and the letter only proves they knew each other. But it's a start, isn't it? Lillian asked anxiously. Her father nodded slowly. Yes, it's a start. Let's see what Blackwell has to say when confronted with this evidence. The next day, a prison wagon arrived in Prospect's End, escorted by 4 armed guards. Jack Blackwell, the man who had terrorized the territory for years, was finally in town to face justice. Lillian watched from the window of her father's study as Blackwell was led into the jail. He was a large man with a thick beard and cold eyes. Even in chains, he radiated danger. That's the man who tried to have Colt killed, she said quietly, and who will answer for his crimes in my courtroom, Judge Ashcroft replied. The trial of Jack Blackwell was set to begin the following morning. Lillian spent the night writing to Colt, telling him about their discoveries and about Blackwell's arrival in Prospect's End. She didn't mail the letter, knowing it wouldn't reach him in time to matter, but writing to him had become a habit, a way of keeping him close even when they were apart. The courthouse was packed to capacity the next day. Everyone wanted to see the infamous Jack Blackwell face justice. Judge Ashcroft entered, his expression solemn as he took his seat at the face. Pench Blackwell was led in, his hands and feet shackled. He surveyed the crowded courtroom with contempt, his gaze stopping briefly on Lillian before moving on. The charges against Blackwell were numerous: multiple robberies, assaults, and 3 counts of murder, including the guard from the Eastern Express. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. The prosecution presented its case first, calling witnesses who had been victims of Blackwell's crimes. Each testimony painted a picture of a violent, ruthless man who cared nothing for the lives he destroyed. When it was time for cross-examination, Judge Ashcroft surprised everyone by asking questions himself, a rare but not unprecedented action for a judge. "Mr. Blackwell," he began, "several witnesses have placed you at the scene of the Eastern Express robbery 2 months ago. Yet another man, Colt Madron, was convicted of that crime. How do you explain that?" Blackwell smirked. "Madron got what he deserved, did he?" Judge Ashcroft pressed. "Or did he take the blame for your crime?" "I ain't admitting to nothing," Blackwell replied. Judge Ashcroft produced the receipt that Lillian had found. "This receipt shows you purchased a pocket watch just like the one found on Madron. Can you explain that?" Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "Lots of men have pocket watches. And this letter," Judge Ashcroft continued, holding up the letter from Blackwell to Jenkins, "proves you were in communication with Frank Jenkins, the man who allegedly gave Madron the watch in a poker game. Convenient, isn't it?" For the first time, Blackwell looked uneasy. "I know lots of people don't mean nothing." The questioning continued, with Judge Ashcroft methodically picking apart Blackwell's defenses. But the outlaw remained stubborn, refusing to admit his role in framing Colt. At the end of the first day of trial, Lillian was discouraged. Without a confession or Jenkins' testimony, they still couldn't prove Colt's innocence. As she prepared to leave the courtroom, a young deputy approached her. "Miss Ashcroft, there's someone asking to see you outside. Says it's urgent." Curious, Lillian followed the deputy out the back door of the courthouse. Standing in the shadows was a thin, nervous-looking man with 3 days' growth of beard. "Are you Lillian Ashcroft?" he asked in a low voice. "I am," she replied cautiously. "Who are you?" "Name's Ellis. Frank Jenkins sent me." Lillian's heart leaped. "You know Jenkins? Where is he?" "On his way to Tucson, like he told your friend at the telegraph office," Ellis replied. "But he wanted me to give you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper. "Said it might help that friend of yours, Madron." Lillian unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It was a signed statement from Frank Jenkins, confessing that he had given the pocket watch to Colt in a poker game and that the watch had previously belonged to Jack Blackwell. The statement also claimed that Blackwell had ordered Jenkins to plant the watch on Colt as part of a plan to frame him for the Eastern Express robbery. "Why is he doing this?" Lillian asked, hardly daring to believe their luck. Ellis shrugged. Jenkins and Blackwell had a falling out. Something about Jenkins not getting his fair share of the loot. And when that lawyer got killed and, well, Jenkins didn't sign up for murder. He may be a thief, but he's got limits. "Will he testify in court?" Lillian asked eagerly. "No, he's too scared of Blackwell's men," Ellis replied. "That's why he's heading to Tucson. But he signed that statement in front of a notary in Silver City. It's legal and binding. Lillian clutched the statement to her chest. Thank you. And thank Jenkins for me if you see him again. Ellis nodded and slipped away into the gathering darkness. Lillian rushed back inside to find her father. This was the evidence they needed, a signed confession that Colt had been framed. Judge Ashcroft read the statement carefully, his expression thoughtful. "This changes things," he said finally. "If it's authentic, it proves Madron was set up for the Eastern Express robbery." "It is authentic, Father," Lillian insisted. "The notary's seal is right there." "I'll need to verify it," her father replied. "But if it's genuine, I'll have to reconsider Madron's case." The next morning, as the trial of Jack Blackwell resumed, Judge Ashcroft called for a special hearing. "New evidence has come to light regarding a related case," he announced to the packed courtroom. "I am ordering the transfer of prisoner Colt Madron from the Territorial Prison to Prospect's End for a review of his conviction." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Lillian felt a surge of hope so strong it nearly took her breath away. The trial of Jack Blackwell continued for 3 more days. With the evidence from Jenkins' statement, Judge Ashcroft was able to extract a reluctant confession from Blackwell about framing Colt. It was a small victory in a long list of charges, but for Lillian, it was everything. On the 4th day, as the jury deliberated Blackwell's fate, a prison wagon arrived in Prospect's End. Lillian watched from her window as Colt was led into the courthouse, his wrists shackled, but his head held high. The special hearing was set for that afternoon. Lillian dressed carefully in her blue dress, the same one she had worn on the day Colt saved her from the stagecoach attack. It felt like coming full circle. The courtroom was less crowded for the hearing than it had been for Blackwell's trial, but still, many townspeople had come to witness the proceedings. Lillian sat in the front row, her heart pounding as Colt was brought in. He looked better than he had in the prison infirmary. His color had returned, and he stood straight and tall despite his shackles. His eyes found Lillian immediately, and the love in them warmed her to her core. Judge Ashcroft entered and took his seat at the bench. "We are here to review the conviction of Colt Madron for the robbery of the Eastern Express," he began. "New evidence has come to light suggesting that Mr. Madron was falsely convicted of this particular crime." He proceeded to read Jenkins' statement and summarize Blackwell's confession. "Based on this evidence, I am inclined to vacate the conviction for the Eastern Express robbery." Hope blossomed in Lillian's chest, but her father wasn't finished. However, Judge Ashcroft continued, "The defendant has admitted to other crimes in the past. The law demands that he be held accountable for those actions, regardless of this wrongful conviction." Lillian felt her hope falter. Her father was going to send Colt back to prison, even knowing he had been framed for the Eastern Express robbery. "Before I render my decision," Judge Ashcroft said, "does anyone wish to speak on the defendant's behalf?" Without hesitation, Lillian stood. Every head in the courtroom turned toward her. She walked to the front of the room, stopping directly in front of Colt. "I wish to speak, Father," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her trembling hands. Judge Ashcroft nodded. "Proceed, Miss Ashcroft." Lillian turned to face the courtroom, but her words were for Colt. "Nearly a year ago, this man saved my life. He didn't know who I was. He didn't ask for reward or recognition. He simply did what was right, even though it put him in danger." She moved closer to Colt, looking into his eyes. "Since then, I have come to know him through his letters, through his actions, through his unwavering honesty, even when the truth didn't serve him. I have seen a man determined to change, to be better than his past." Lillian took a deep breath. "Before you say the words, Father, I want him to hear something else first." She turned fully to Colt now, her heart thundering in her chest. "You asked me once if I believed you could be good. I do, and if you live past this day, I'll marry you, not because I owe you my life, but because you showed me how to live it." The courtroom was utterly silent. Lillian could feel every eye on her, but she didn't care. All that mattered was the man standing before her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Slowly, Lillian turned to face her father. Judge Ashcroft's expression was unreadable, but there was a shimmer in his eyes that might have been tears. The gavel hovered in his hand. The town held its breath, The judge stared at his daughter, then at the man his court had branded an outlaw. His voice cracked for the first time in years. Verdict. He hesitated, looking from Lillian to Colt and back again. In that moment, Lillian saw not the stern judge, but the father who had lost the love of his life and who now recognized that same love in his daughter's eyes. In light of the false conviction, the time already served, and the character testimonial we have just heard, Judge Ashcroft said finally, "I am reducing the defendant's sentence to time served." The gavel fell with a sharp crack. "Colt Madron, you are free to go." For a moment Lillian couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the reality of her father's words hit her. Colt was free. Free to live his life. Free to love her. The sheriff stepped forward to unlock Colt's shackles. As they fell, away Colt rubbed his wrists, looking dazed. "Is it true?" he asked Lillian softly. "Did you mean what you said?" "Every word," she replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. Colt took her hands in his. "Then ask me properly, Lillian Ashcroft." Lillian smiled through her tears. "Colt Madron, will you marry me?" "Yes," he said simply. "Today, tomorrow, any day you want, for the rest of our lives." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, right there in the courtroom, in front of her father and the entire town. And Lillian kissed him back, not caring who saw, only knowing that the man she loved was finally free. When they parted, Lillian turned to her father, who had descended from the bench and was watching them with a mixture of resignation and fondness. "Thank you, Father," she said, embracing him. "Don't thank me," Judge Ashcroft replied gruffly. "Thank the law. Justice was served today, even if not in the way I expected." He turned to Colt, his expression stern but not unkind. "I'm trusting you with my daughter's happiness, Madron. Don't make me regret it." "I won't, sir," Colt promised, his arm around Lillian's waist. "I'll spend every day making her happy and making myself worthy of her." Judge Ashcroft nodded, satisfied. "See that you do." As they left the courthouse together, stepping out into the bright sunshine of a new day, Lillian felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be those who would never accept Colt's past, who would always see him as an outlaw. But they would face it together day by day, building a life founded on truth and love. "What happens now?" Colt asked, as they paused on the courthouse steps. Lillian smiled up at him. "Now we live, Colt Madron. Now we truly live." And as he kissed her again, Lillian knew that sometimes justice came not from the fall of a gavel, but from the courage to stand up for love, even when the whole world was watching. In the end, it wasn't the law that had saved Colt. It was love. The love of a woman who believed in him, who saw beyond his past to the man he could become. And in saving him, Lillian had also saved herself, finding a love worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Before the gavel fell, fate had brought them together. And now, after the gavel had fallen for the final time, fate would keep them together forever.